My name is Celia Whitman. I'm 31 years old. And this is the story of how my family tried to steal everything I worked for, and how I fought back even when it nearly destroyed me. Growing up in the Whitman house, I learned early that love came with terms and conditions. My younger sister, Vanessa, was the golden child, their miracle baby. I was just the older one, the reliable one, the one who quietly did the dishes and folded the laundry while my parents doted on Vanessa like she was spun from gold. The shift happened when I was 5. Before Vanessa was born, I was still my dad's little girl. He used to take me to the park and hoist me up on his shoulders. But the moment she arrived, it was like someone flipped a switch in his brain. My mom, Bernice, started hand-stitching Vanessa's initials onto everything. Towels, pillowcases, even her diapers. She dressed us in matching outfits for a while, until one day she sighed and said, "Celia just doesn't photograph well next to her." That was the last time we matched. When I was 6, I drew a picture of a purple giraffe flying through space. I remember running to show it to my mom while she was feeding Vanessa in her velvet rocking chair. She glanced at it and gave me a tight smile. "Purple giraffes aren't real, sweetheart. Vanessa draws butterflies. You should try that." I said nothing. I folded the drawing, tucked it under my mattress, and it was never mentioned again. Vanessa's scribbles, meanwhile, were stuck to every door and fridge in the house like holy relics. Vanessa had these wide hazel eyes and dimples. Whenever she giggled, everyone stopped what they were doing just to coo at her. I was quiet, bookish, nearsighted by 3rd grade, with my shoulders already hunched from carrying more than just textbooks. My mother used to say, "Celia's got a brain but no charm," and everyone would laugh. I learned to laugh too. You learn when you're the shadow in someone else's spotlight. At 10, I won a state writing competition. I'd written a story about a blind girl who befriends a stray dog. It won first prize. I came home with a certificate, my chest puffed out, hoping for a sliver of recognition. But they weren't home. They were at Vanessa's piano recital. When they got back, I showed them. My mom said, "Don't let this go to your head. You don't want to end up one of those weird writers who never marry." My dad didn't even look up from the TV. Is there prize money? By my teens, I was the house ghost. I cleaned, studied, kept quiet. Vanessa got excused from chores so she could focus on her future. She wanted to be a singer or a YouTube star or a wedding planner depending on the week. Meanwhile, I was elbow deep in chemistry books, trying to scrape together scholarships so I could get out. At 17, I was offered a full ride to the University of Illinois. I told my mom, hoping she'd be proud. She raised an eyebrow. "Out of state? Who's going to help around the house when you're gone?" So I left on my 18th birthday. No hugs, no cake. Just me and a beat-up suitcase, boarding a bus with a one-way ticket and no idea how to be anything other than invisible. College was cold at first. Not just the Illinois winters but the isolation. But it was also quiet, and for the first time, no one expected me to disappear so someone else could shine. I studied like my life depended on it. Maybe it did. I took 3 jobs, library assistant, lab tech, and part-time janitor. I became the kind of person who didn't flinch when people forgot my name. I was already used to that. After graduation, I landed a junior position at a small pharmaceutical company in Chicago. The salary wasn't mind-blowing. $68,000 a year to start. But it was mine. Kept living like I was broke. Ate ramen. Bought used furniture. Rewore the same coat for 4 winters. Every extra penny went into savings. I had a dream to own a house. Not because I wanted to show off but because I wanted one thing my family never gave me. Stability. And I got it. At 29, after 10 years of hustling, I bought a modest 3-bedroom home in Evanston for $437,000. White siding, small yard, and a cherry blossom tree in the front. I painted every wall myself, changed every doorknob, cried the first night I slept there. Not out of sadness, but because I couldn't believe I had made something so solid from so little. I didn't tell my family. What was the point? But out of some buried instinct, I mailed a single line to their address. "I'm doing fine. No need to worry. 2 weeks later the text started. Call me when you can. It's about Vanessa. Then an invitation arrived. Her engagement party. I don't know why I went. Maybe I hoped foolishly they had changed. Maybe I wanted them to see that I was no longer the doormat. Either way, I walked into a mansion in Lake Forest that reeked of rented elegance and false smiles. Vanessa was glowing. Fake eyelashes, champagne in hand, surrounded by friends and photographers. I gave her a silver photo frame as a gift. My mom gave me a glance and told me to follow her to the side room. My father stood there like some mafia boss with a favor to ask. You live alone, he said. Vanessa's getting married. She needs a good start. Then the bombshell. You should gift her the house. Blinked. Excuse me. My mother chimed in. You have no kids. No husband. That house could give Vanessa the future she deserves. Call it a wedding gift. I felt like I was in a twisted fever dream. My childhood of being forgotten, shoved aside, diminished. And now they wanted the only thing I had earned for myself. I'm not giving her anything, I said, calm but cold. They didn't scream. That was worse. They just looked at me like I had failed a final test. My mom muttered, Don't be selfish. This family's given you everything. I walked out without another word. But I knew something had shifted. They weren't going to let this go. I was right. Because what happened at Vanessa's wedding, just 1 month later, would change everything. And it would end with sirens, blood, and a courtroom full of strangers watching the truth unravel, one piece at a time. I didn't want to go to Vanessa's wedding. Every fiber of me said no. I told myself I didn't owe them anything. Not presents, not politeness, not even acknowledgement. But guilt is a strange thing. It seeps in through cracks you didn't even know were still open. So I went. Not for them. For closure. Or so I thought. The wedding was held in a glass conservatory in Highland Park. High ceilings, string lights, soft piano music drifting through the air like perfume. It was all designed to scream elegance, perfection, fairy tale. Vanessa's fairy tale. I arrived in a muted navy dress, my hair pulled back in a low bun. No flashy jewelry, no date. Just me, quietly finding the seat farthest from the front. It was easy. No one was saving me a spot. I was seated at a table labeled, Extended Guests. I didn't recognize a single face. It was fine. I was used to being on the outskirts. But there was something deeply unsettling in the air that day. I could feel it, even before the vows were read. I could see it in my mother's eyes when she glanced at me. Cold. Calculated. When the ceremony ended, and the guests moved toward hors d'oeuvres and champagne, I stood by the refreshment table, sipping a glass of water, watching Vanessa and Logan pose under the floral archway. She looked stunning, I'll admit it. White silk, glittering hairpins, a smile that could melt cameras. But when her eyes caught mine, for just a moment, her smile faltered. Only for a heartbeat, but it was there. Annoyance. Dread. That's when Bernice appeared beside me. Her voice like a dagger wrapped in tulle. Your father would like a word. In the back corner. I wanted to refuse. I should have refused. But something in me, the old Celia, the obedient daughter who didn't want to make a scene, still obeyed. The back of the hall was draped in white curtains. A staff member pulled them aside to let me in. Inside was a table with the wedding cake and a decorative metal base engraved with Vanessa and Logan's names. My father, Gregory Whitman, stood next to it, hands behind his back. Celia, he said, voice softer than usual. You still have a chance to do the right thing. I stared at him. If this is about the house. It is, Bernice snapped, stepping in behind me. We asked for something simple. A gift. A gesture of support. And you act like we're criminals. That house is mine, I said evenly. I spent 10 years earning it. 10 years you weren't there. And now you want it handed over like a party favor. Gregory's jaw tightened. You're choosing this. Don't make today ugly. Ugly. I laughed. Not loud. Bitter. I gave up everything for this family. My childhood. My voice. And the one thing I claimed for myself, you're trying to take. You don't get to shame this family, he growled, stepping closer. I turned to leave. That's when it happened. He grabbed my wrist. Like he used to when I was little and in trouble. Except this time I wasn't a child. Let go of me, I said. He didn't. Not right away. And then, in a blur, his other hand grabbed the metal base of the cake stand. Heavy, ornamental, sharp edge, and he swung. A blinding pain exploded through my head. I didn't even hear the crash. Just felt it like lightning behind my eyes. My legs buckled. My knees hit the marble floor. Warm blood poured down my temple. I heard gasps shouting. Distant like underwater. Someone yelled, "She's bleeding. Call an ambulance." The world tilted. Guests swarmed around. Phones raised. Screams filled the air. Gregory stood above me, frozen, the blood-stained base still in his hand. Bernice didn't kneel beside me. She didn't check if I was alive. She just hissed, "Why did you have to ruin this?" Vanessa's fiancé, Logan, was the first to reach me. His face was white as bone. "Jesus, Celia." "What the hell?" Daniel, one of his groomsmen, grabbed his phone. "I'm calling 911. This was an assault." I clutched my head, barely conscious. My dress soaked in red. My vision blurred, but I saw enough to know one thing. No one in my family was helping me. Police sirens arrived in minutes. Officers burst in, taking in the scene. The crowd, the blood, the weapons still on the floor. Two of them approached my father. "Gregory Whitman, you are under arrest for suspected aggravated assault." My mother screamed. "She's lying. She staged this. She's jealous of her sister." The second officer turned to her calmly. "Ma'am, we'll take your statement at the station. You'll be coming with us." And just like that, they were both handcuffed. In front of 150 guests. The same guests who had taken selfies with my parents just hours earlier now watched in shocked silence as they were led away like criminals. 'Cause they were. I was taken to North Shore Hospital with Logan riding beside me in the ambulance. He never let go of my hand. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "No one should ever go through this. Not today. Not ever." I turned to him, pain stabbing through my skull. "Logan, you're marrying into this." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I saw it in his eyes. Horror. A man seeing the mask of his in-laws shatter for the first time. The wedding was over. Not just postponed, obliterated. But what came next would be worse for my parents. Because this time I wasn't going to just walk away. The wedding never resumed. There was no cake cutting, no first dance, no bouquet toss. Only the echo of gasps, the distant scream of sirens, and the slick, surreal feeling of blood trickling down my face as I was wheeled out of the venue under the cold stare of my own mother. I was in the emergency room for 6 hours. The diagnosis was a mild concussion, along with a laceration that required 8 stitches. A nurse cleaned the wound carefully while murmuring, "You're lucky it wasn't deeper." I wasn't sure if she meant the wound or the damage my family had already done to me over 31 years. The pain was manageable. But the silence from my parents and Vanessa wasn't. No messages, no calls, no apology, not even a check-in to ask if I was alive. The only person who visited every day was Logan. And not out of guilt but something gentler, something that looked a lot like remorse and resolve. On the third day he brought purple dahlias, my favorite flower which I had mentioned once years ago in a passing conversation he somehow remembered. He sat beside me, hands folded over a folder I hadn't noticed at first. "I didn't know it would go that far," he said quietly. "I knew they were pushy, but Celia, what your dad did, what your mother let him do, it's beyond anything I can explain away." "I know," I said. We sat in silence for a moment. Then he placed the folder on my lap. "This is from a friend of mine, Marcus Levinson. He's a lawyer. I told him everything. If you want to press charges, he's ready." I stared at the folder. I didn't touch it. "You're asking me to take my own parents to court." "No," Logan said. I'm asking you to stand up for yourself. I said nothing. Couldn't. That night I barely slept. My head throbbed with more than injury. It pulsed with the ghosts of every moment I had been shoved aside. Every time I heard "Vanessa deserves this," or "Don't be selfish," or "You should know better." Every time they dismissed my pain, diminished my efforts, expected me to serve them and disappear. And now they had tried to take the last thing I owned, my house, and when I said no, they tried to beat me into submission. Literally. The next day, I signed the legal authorization with a trembling hand but a steady heart. Marcus came to my hospital room that afternoon. He was in his early 40s, dressed in a navy suit with a steel-colored tie, and eyes that didn't blink often. The kind of lawyer who didn't just know the law, but knew how to use it like a weapon. "I'm filing under 3 charges," he said after listening to everything. "Aggravated assault, prolonged emotional abuse, and attempted coercion of property. You can do that?" "Yes." He nodded. "Yes. And with the evidence we have, the video, the witnesses, your medical records, you have a very strong case." I inhaled slowly. "This will go public, won't it?" "Eventually, yes." My voice was small. "They'll say I did it for attention." "They've already tried to destroy your character," Marcus said. "Now they'll try to destroy your credibility. But we'll show the court exactly who they are." And so it began. In the next 4 days, Marcus and his team compiled everything. Videos from 6 guests, all showing my father swinging the metal cake stand. Witness statements from Logan, Daniel, and even a retired couple who had known the Whitmans for 2 decades and were sickened by what they saw. Medical records were collected and authenticated. A psychological evaluation of my long-term emotional abuse was arranged. Marcus also filed a restraining order against my parents. The preliminary hearing date arrived fast, faster than I could emotionally prepare. But I went, with my head still bandaged and my spine straighter than ever before. The courthouse was crowded that day. Local news outlets had picked up the story. "Bride's sister hospitalized by father at wedding." Clickbait headlines flooded social media. I stayed offline. Logan was waiting for me at the courthouse steps. He didn't say much, just opened the door and walked beside me, our footsteps echoing on the stone stairs. Inside, the courtroom smelled like paper and polish. Took my seat. Across the aisle, Gregory and Bernice sat in tailored suits, their lawyer beside them, a man with graying temples and a permanent frown. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. The judge was a tall woman in her 60s with silver hair swept into a bun. Her name was Judge Morrison, the kind of woman you instinctively respected. When Marcus began to speak, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "This case is not only about a physical assault," he said, addressing the jury. "It's about a lifetime of abuse, of manipulation, of treating one daughter as disposable and the other as a prize. And when the disposable one finally said no, they tried to break her into silence." He presented everything. The videos, the photos of my injury, timeline of events, text, the receipts of my home purchase, the emotional testimonies from Logan, Daniel, and the Whitmans' own longtime family friends. When I took the stand, I trembled. But I didn't cry. I spoke plainly. I don't want to destroy my parents. I wanted to be loved by them. I spent 3 decades trying. But I finally realized, love that comes with conditions isn't love at all. The defense tried to spin it. Claimed my father had a momentary lapse of control, that he had been under stress, that I was emotionally unstable. They even tried to suggest I had instigated the confrontation. But the footage didn't lie. Neither did the scar across my forehead. On the 3rd day, the jury deliberated for just under 2 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty. On all counts. I felt my chest collapse with relief. Judge Morrison didn't hesitate. Given the weight of evidence and the intent behind these actions, I sentenced Gregory and Bernice Whitman to 8 years of incarceration, with no parole eligibility for 6. Additionally, The court orders them to pay $320,000 in damages, legal fees, and medical costs to the plaintiff, Celia Whitman. There was a sharp gasp in the room. Someone whispered, "Finally!" My parents were handcuffed, this time in orange jumpsuits. Gregory didn't look at me. Bernice did. Her face wasn't regretful. It was burning with hatred, like I had ruined something sacred. But I didn't feel shame. Felt free. As Logan and I walked out of the courthouse into the soft drizzle of a Chicago afternoon, he opened an umbrella over our heads. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like someone's burden. I felt like someone worth protecting. And for the first time in 31 years, I knew this was just the beginning. The days after the verdict were strangely quiet. No reporters knocking at my door. No messages from Vanessa. No social media storms. Just silence. As if the world had blinked for a moment, held its breath, and decided to move on. But I hadn't. Inside me, something had fundamentally shifted. For most of my life, I believed survival meant staying small. Staying out of the way. Letting others shine while I scrubbed the background clean. But the trial, my own voice in that courtroom, taught me something dangerous and freeing. I wasn't born to be silent. 1 week after the sentencing, I returned to my house in Evanston. The same home my parents tried to steal for their favorite daughter. I stood at the edge of the walkway, looking up at the place I had bought with a decade of exhaustion. My key shook in my hand, but not from fear. From power. From knowing it was mine in a way no one could ever question again. Inside, nothing had changed. My curtains still hung where I left them. The books on my shelf still leaned slightly because I hadn't fixed the angle. But the air was different. Lighter. Logan showed up an hour later, carrying groceries like he belonged there. Like we both knew this wasn't temporary. We didn't talk about the court. Or my parents. Or Vanessa. We painted the spare room beige. Not because it needed it, but because it felt like starting over. He called it our proof of peace. A place that had never echoed with yelling or guilt or shame. Then, one night, a week after the trial, he did something I didn't expect. He proposed. It wasn't dramatic. There was no crowd or fireworks or orchestras. Just us, sitting on the porch with mugs of tea, watching the streetlight blink across the cherry tree out front. "I know this isn't the dream proposal," he said, pulling out a small velvet box from his jacket. "And I know this isn't the perfect timing. But I also know this. You've built your entire life from ash and silence. I want to spend every day making sure you never feel invisible again." I stared at the ring. It wasn't massive. Just a simple silver band with a single aquamarine stone. The same color as the lake the day after the trial, when the skies finally cleared. Said yes. And for the first time it didn't feel like I was giving something away. It felt like I was choosing myself, and allowing someone to walk beside me. We didn't plan a massive wedding. There were no cathedral halls, no guest lists filled with family politics or status games. Just 30 people in the backyard of my home, our home. We stood under string lights we hung ourselves. The music came from a Bluetooth speaker, not a band. The flowers were daisies from a local market, not some imported spectacle. Marcus, my lawyer-turned-friend, officiated. Daniel gave a short toast. Logan's parents, who had completely cut ties with the Whitmans after the wedding disaster, offered a quiet blessing. And when I walked down the aisle, I wore a soft ivory dress I picked out with no one else's opinion in mind. I wasn't trying to look like Vanessa. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just wanted to feel like myself. And I did. As we exchanged vows, Logan said, "I won't promise that life will always be easy. But I promise you'll never carry it alone." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I placed my hand on his chest, right over his heart, and he understood. After the ceremony, we cut a cake that a friend baked in their kitchen. No photographers. No hashtags. Joy. Real quiet joy. That night, Logan carried me over the threshold. Not because tradition demanded it, but because he wanted to. I laughed, told him he'd throw his back out. But I let him. I let someone care for me in a way I had never allowed before. And then, real life began. We planted lavender in the backyard. We rearranged furniture 5 times until it felt like us. We cooked meals that burned and tried new things like pottery and hiking trails that ended in mosquito bites. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since college. Writing became my way of understanding the new silence in my life, the silence that didn't hurt anymore. A silence that came with peace, not punishment. Sometimes I'd dream of my mother's voice, sharp and slicing, or Gregory's glare when he realized I wouldn't back down. But each time I woke up, Logan would be next to me, brewing coffee, reading the paper like nothing bad ever lived in our walls. And eventually the dreams stopped. 6 months after the verdict, I received an unexpected letter. Not from Vanessa. Not from my parents. From a stranger. It was handwritten, the ink slightly smudged. Celia, I watched your trial online. My daughter went through something similar, though not as public. I just want to say thank you for standing up when so many are taught to sit down. Your story made me brave. I filed for divorce last week. And I'm keeping the house. It was signed with just a first name, Marcia. I sat on the couch holding the letter for a long time. Then I cried. Not from sadness, but because I knew. My voice hadn't just freed me. It was freeing others too. And I wasn't done yet. The letter from Marcia stayed on my fridge for weeks. Not because I wanted to frame it, but because I needed to see it. Every time I passed the kitchen, its presence reminded me that speaking up, after years of being silent, had ripple effects. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It was becoming a lifeline for others. That realization changed something in me. It didn't feel right to go back to my old routine, clocking into work at Evermere Pharmaceuticals, running molecule analyses like I hadn't just torn through 30 years of emotional chains. I loved my field, I did. But after everything, I couldn't pretend that the world hadn't cracked open. One evening, Logan found me sitting on the floor in the hallway, surrounded by every journal I'd kept since college. Some of them were stained with tears. Some had entire pages blacked out in frustration. Others were filled with dreams I never thought I'd live long enough to see. He sat beside me quietly and waited. Finally I looked up. I think I need to do more. He smiled. Then let's figure out what that looks like. And we did. With Marcus's help, we started sketching the idea for something called Restore, a non-profit legal and emotional aid center specifically for people who had suffered emotional or financial abuse at the hands of their own families. Spouses, parents, siblings, it didn't matter. Pain was pain. Silence was silence. We were going to help people break out of both. Marcus connected us with 2 other attorneys who had handled similar cases. Logan tapped into his finance network and secured our seed funding. I used my own settlement money to rent a small space on the north side of Chicago. Modest, but filled with light. Felt important to work somewhere with windows. Somewhere that didn't feel like a cage. We opened Restore 8 months after the trial. On day 1 we received 7 intake calls. By week 3 we had 46 active inquiries. I met women in their 50s who had stayed quiet their whole lives. I met men who had been manipulated into signing over inheritances, homes, businesses, just like what almost happened to me. I met teenagers who had been thrown out of their homes for saying no. We helped all of them. Logan ran the back end, managing donations, partnerships, and budget breakdowns. I did the hard part, the human part, listening to the stories. Sitting in silence when someone cried too hard to speak. Explaining legal rights in a way that didn't sound like a courtroom speech, but a hug. And in the process, something happened that I didn't expect. I healed. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But little by little, piece by piece. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something with meaning. And I was no longer defined by what I had escaped. I was defined by what I was creating. Still, the past has a way of knocking when you least expect it. It came in the form of an envelope. Plain. No return address. Just my name in familiar, slanted handwriting. I opened it slowly, bracing for venom. Inside were two things, a photo and a note. The photo was of my parents, in orange jumpsuits, sitting behind the glass of a prison visitation room. Vanessa sat between them. Her face was blotchy, as if she'd been crying for hours. Gregory looked aged. Bernice looked as angry as ever. Vanessa. She looked tired. The note was short. Celia. I know you hate me. Maybe I deserve it. But I didn't know what they planned to do. I didn't know they'd hurt you. I'm sorry I didn't say anything when I should have. I lost Logan. I lost everything. Maybe that's justice. Or maybe it's just what happens when you stay silent for too long. I hope your life is better than mine. Vanessa. I stared at the note for a long time. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. Hello. For years, I had wanted Vanessa to apologize, to acknowledge her part. But now that the words were in front of me, they felt paper thin. Not cruel, not fake. Too late. I didn't respond. I didn't burn it either. I folded the letter and slid it into the back of one of my old journals. It didn't belong in the trash. But it didn't belong in my future either. The past can be acknowledged without being welcomed back. A few months later, I sat on a panel at a legal conference, speaking about emotional inheritance abuse. How families pass down guilt like heirlooms, how victims are often told to be grateful, while their dignity is stripped away piece by piece. Afterward, a young woman approached me. She was maybe 23, with shaking hands and a bruise fading on her collarbone. I watched your story online, she whispered. I left my house the next day. I'm living with a friend now. Have nothing. But I'm not scared anymore. I took her hand. You have more than you think. And in that moment, I knew something no verdict, no wedding, no apology could teach me. When you use your voice, you don't just speak for yourself. You speak for every version of yourself that never got the chance. I used to be the girl in the corner of the room, holding her breath so no one would yell. Now I was the woman helping others breathe for the first time. The garden behind our house wasn't big, but it became a sacred place. Logan and I had planted every inch with our hands. Daisies, lavender, a young maple tree that had already grown strong enough to cast a little shade by late summer. There was something healing about dirt under the nails, about watching things grow where nothing had ever thrived before. One crisp October morning, I sat on the back steps with a mug of tea, my legs wrapped in a blanket, staring at the tree. I remembered standing in this same spot a year ago, watching snowflakes fall, wondering if I'd ever feel anything but survival. And now, I was at peace. Not every day, but most days. And for me, that was everything. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and old books. Logan was painting a spare piece of furniture we'd found at a thrift store. The music playing on our old speaker was soft, some acoustic indie song I barely knew the name of. And I realized I had everything I once begged the universe for. Safety, stillness, love not tied to sacrifice. But even in the quiet, the past occasionally returned. Not in nightmares or sudden panic, but in the form of unexpected letters. Another envelope came, this time from a law firm in Springfield. At first I thought it was a tax issue or something related to Restore. But when I opened it, I found something that took my breath away. It was a will. My grandmother's will. I hadn't even known she'd passed. My mother's mother, Eleanor, was the only person in my childhood who'd ever shown me genuine warmth. She'd lived 3 hours away, in a town so quiet you could hear the seasons change. We visited only twice a year, and during those visits, she always made a point to talk to me. Not just at me. She would sneak me peppermints, slip me small paperback books, and once whispered, "One day, they'll regret how they treated you. Just wait." According to the letter, Eleanor had quietly updated her will the year before she died. She left her small lakeside cabin to me. Only me. Not Bernice. Not Vanessa. Me. I stared at the page as if it would rewrite itself. But it didn't. There was even a handwritten note, attached separately by the estate lawyer. "My darling Celia, I always saw you, even when your parents didn't. This cabin is old, but it's yours. A place for you to rest, think, write, be exactly who you are without apology. I hope it brings you peace. With all my love always. Grandma Eleanor. The tears came before I could stop them. Logan found me crying on the couch, the will clutched to my chest like a lifeline. I looked at him, laughing through my tears. She saw me. All this time someone saw me. He didn't ask questions. He just wrapped his arms around me and said, "Let's go see it." 2 weekends later we drove up to the cabin. It was small, peeling paint, a creaky porch, shutters that needed replacing, but it sat on a piece of land that overlooked a still, mirror-like lake. The kind of place that seemed frozen in time. Haven. A home someone built with care, not convenience. Inside, I found an old bookshelf with yellowing copies of every book I used to read in college. I found a blanket I remembered from childhood, still tucked in the corner armchair. And in a small box on the mantel, there was a faded photo of me as a teenager. Awkward, hunched over a book, with a scribbled note on the back in Eleanor's handwriting. She doesn't know it yet, but she's going to change the world. I collapsed into that chair and wept. It wasn't about the cabin. It was about knowing someone had believed in me before I ever learned how to believe in myself. We decided to renovate it slowly, over time. Weekends of sanding, painting, fixing the cracked windows. Logan called it Celia's sanctuary, which made me roll my eyes, but secretly I liked it. It became a place for writing, for thinking, for planning new ways Restore could expand. Marcus helped us file for nonprofit grants. We brought on another therapist. We extended hours to include support groups. Every wall in the office slowly filled with thank you notes and survivor photos. One day, a woman named Denise came in, late 40s, holding her story like a grenade. Her father had made her sign over the deed to her childhood home. Her mother had called her dramatic when she cried about it. Now she lived in a friend's basement, with 2 bags and a scar no one could see. I sat with her for hours. And as she left, she turned and asked, "How did you do it? How did you survive your own blood?" I told her the truth. I stopped asking for permission. I thought that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. That night she emailed me something that struck me hard. A poem she had written years ago and never shown anyone. It ended with this line: "I was born in silence, but I am not silence." And I knew. Our voices didn't just free us. They became bridges for others. In December, we hosted Restore's first public forum. Survivors, advocates, lawyers, and supporters filled a rented hall on the south side. I stood on stage, microphone in hand, looking out at a crowd I never imagined would exist. And I told my story. Not just the courtroom version. The real story. The nights I cried into textbooks. The holidays I spent alone. The weight of being the sister who never mattered. Until I mattered too much because I had something they wanted. And I ended with this: you don't owe anyone your silence. Especially not the people who built their lives on it. The applause lasted minutes. People stood. Some cried. Logan took my hand and whispered, "I've never been more proud of you." I smiled through my tears and whispered back, "I've never been more proud of me." Spring returned early the next year. The cherry tree in our backyard bloomed again, soft pink petals dancing like confetti every time the wind stirred. Logan and I sat beneath it often, our lives no longer rushing forward, but unfolding like pages we were finally writing for ourselves. And still, every now and then, the past would flicker at the edges of that piece. Not violently, not like before, but subtly. A headline here, a whisper there. I learned through mutual contacts that Gregory and Bernice were struggling in prison, not just with confinement but with identity. For so long they had been the ones in control. Now, behind bars, their only power was denial. Vanessa, from what little I heard, moved into a small apartment in Milwaukee. She'd lost most of her social circle after the wedding disaster went viral. And Logan, well, he never spoke to her again. She sent him one letter after the trial. He never opened it. Just handed it to me and said, "You can read it if you want. But I don't need to." I never read it either. I burned it in the fireplace that night, not out of hatred, but because some things don't deserve a second chance. Especially silence dressed up as regret. By then, Restore had grown into something far bigger than I had ever envisioned. We opened a second office on the west side, hired our third attorney, and established partnerships with local shelters and hospitals. Survivors started bringing their friends. Then those friends brought their neighbors. A ripple effect of courage, each voice echoing louder than the one before. One morning in late May, I received an email that stopped me cold. The subject line: Keynote Request, Women Who Rise Annual Conference. I thought it was spam at first. But it wasn't. The event was real. National. Huge. And they wanted me to speak. To tell my story in front of thousands of attendees. Not just as a survivor but as a founder, as a fighter, as a symbol of what it meant to reclaim your narrative. Said yes. The night before the conference, I stood in front of the mirror wearing a navy dress. Not flashy but strong. The kind of thing I would have been too afraid to wear years ago. Logan kissed my shoulder and whispered, "They have no idea what's about to hit them." At the conference center, I stood backstage listening to the host introduce me. Up next is a woman who turned her pain into a movement. Who took on her own family in a courtroom and won. Who now helps hundreds do the same. Please welcome Celia Whitman. The applause as I stepped onto that stage was deafening. But I didn't smile right away. I stood there, silent for a moment, letting the noise wash over me like a baptism. Then I began. I was the invisible daughter, I said. The one expected to serve without asking. To give without receiving. And to disappear the second she said no. I told them everything. The wedding. The attack. The trial. The letter from Vanessa. The birth of Restore. And the moment under the cherry tree, when I realized I no longer owed my pain to the people who caused it. My story, I said, isn't unique. It's just spoken out loud. When I finished, the standing ovation lasted for nearly 5 minutes. And when I stepped off that stage, women, some sobbing, some silent, some holding each other, reached for me one after another. It was never about fame. It was about being heard. And in that moment I knew. My voice would never go quiet again. That summer, Logan and I finally took a real honeymoon. Not to Paris or Bali. Just a cabin in the Oregon woods. No cell service. No headlines. Just us, surrounded by trees and birds, and the stillness of a life we had built from the rubble of betrayal. One evening, as we watched the sun set over the treetops, he asked, "Do you ever miss them?" Took me a moment to answer. "No," I said finally. "I grieve what could have been. But I don't miss people who only saw me as useful when I was silent." He nodded. "You're the bravest person I know." I shook my head gently. "I'm not brave. I was just done being afraid." We sat in silence for a while, holding hands. I had spent so many years believing that love had to be earned through obedience. That boundaries were punishments. That saying no made you selfish. Now I understood the truth. Saying no is the greatest act of self-love there is. It says, I deserve peace. It says, I will not set myself on fire to keep others warm. It says, I am not afraid to walk away from people who only loved me on their terms. And most of all it says, I am finally choosing me. In the years that followed, Restore went national. We opened offices in 5 states. We worked with lawmakers to pass protections for adult children facing financial coercion. We built a scholarship fund for survivors trying to rebuild their lives. But for me, the greatest legacy was this. Every time a woman signed her own lease for the first time. Every time a teenager walked into our office with bruises and left with hope. Every time someone said, I didn't think I had a choice until I heard your story. That was justice. That was healing. That was everything. And so, if you're reading this, if you've ever been the forgotten child, the silent sibling, the scapegoat, the survivor, I want you to hear one thing. You're not alone. You're not wrong for walking away. And you are never ever selfish for choosing peace. Because peace is not the absence of pain. It's the presence of self-worth. And that, more than anything, is what I fought to reclaim. Thank you for watching Revenge Echoes, where stories speak louder than revenge. If Celia's journey moved you, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real, raw, and powerful stories of justice, redemption, and reclaiming your voice.